I've read a lot about microplastics being found in human placentas, in the brain. There's so many different fear-mongering headlines now about that we're slowly becoming plastic inside and out.
If I make a blood test right now on you, I'm sure I would find hundreds of chemicals which are circulating in your blood. Sometimes it's even chemicals which have been banned 40 years. You will find grams of plastics inside because this is an accumulation of the consequence of our lifestyle.
Robin, tell everyone who you are.
Yeah, I'm Robin Mesnage. I'm a toxicologist. I'm a scientist working on how lifestyle can impact us. But now I'm trying also to find solutions.
I guess we don't actually know the impacts of what it's having in our bodies right now.
If you look at the people who have dementia, they have generally higher quantities of microplastic in their brain because it's causing inflammation and then it will make people more sick.
So you just spoke about there something that was really interesting that you see written on a lot of these kind of plastic products, which is like BPA-Free. Can you first of all explain like what that is?
Bisphenol A, BPA, this is a molecule which is used in plastics as a plasticizer. This is very small.
Are they really as safe as we think they are?
It was developed to be a contraceptive pill. It was mimicking estrogen hormones. And decades later, industries still choose to make it into plastics, into our everyday life, knowing that it has this effect. When you have a baby bottle which is BPA-free, this is not safe. It's better to have a glass bottle.
What do you think the biggest form of ingestion of microplastics is that we can try and reduce?
There's a lot we can do for ourselves first and also in the future. I like to take this example because this is also where you can act easily.
Firstly, I want to say thank you to tuning in and listening to the show. It means a huge amount. And connecting with all of you is something that I absolutely love as part of this journey of growing the show. One of my biggest goals of 2025 is doubling the reach of this show. And I can't do that without your support. So I would love to ask you a favor. If you can press subscribe or follow on whichever platform you listen to. This helps us reach more people. And for me, elevating women in science is so fundamental and ethical and scientific information. So if you feel the show empowers you and gives you the information that you've been seeking, I would love to ask a favor in return and to hit that subscribe button and help me reach the goal that I've set for the show of 2025. Thank you. About 5 months ago, my mum sent me a message on WhatsApp on a study and a huge piece in the newspaper about microplastics. And your name was the person who wrote it. So I immediately reached out to you. And so I'm thrilled to have a conversation today on something that is so essential that we're all talking about. And it's on microplastics. So before I get into microplastics, what they are, where the research is currently, actually what people are quite scared of, Robin, just tell everyone who you are and why we're here today.
Yeah, I'm Robin Mesnage. I'm the toxicologist. I'm a scientist working on how lifestyle can impact us. And so this is pollution, microplastics, plastics, pesticides. I've looked at so many toxic chemicals, but also I didn't look just at problems, but now I'm trying also to find solutions. So how the life you have, nutrition, fasting, sleep, emotional health can also be improved so that you live healthy and happy. And so this is really my line of research is to try to find the problem, but also solutions in how the environment impacts us. But environment is not just the chemicals and the approximate environment, but also like how we eat and how we live.
And why did you find this? Like, obviously, it's a very specific area of research. Like, what was it that drew you into this?
I was always interested by the effect of the environment. And first, I wanted to work more in the ecology part to try to save wildlife and climate and so on, like dreams when I was younger. And then I just, by chance, met a professor at the University of Caen in France, where I lived and worked. And he was working on the effects of pesticide, Professor Seralini. And I really got interested by this because I discovered that basically this is affecting everyone. This is making us sick and no one talks about it or very little. And it's because this is a pollution you don't see, you can't act on it very easily. And so this is neglected. And so I decided that I should work on this topic because there is so much to be done to raise awareness and discover like how we can really improve the regulation for pesticides to be safer, for people to be protected from pesticides. That's really how I started my career.
Wow. I think it is. I mean, pesticides is something that I think we would definitely delve into near the end of this episode. And I want to start with microplastics because it's definitely having a moment. And I think there is a part where people are now too afraid to consume so many different things. And I also think that is also not very healthy. So I really want to dial it down today. And I want to start by, saying that I've read a lot about microplastics being found in human placentas, in the brain, during egg retrieval. Like there's so many different fear-mongering headlines now about that we're slowly becoming plastic inside and out. And so when I think about that, it does scare me. I wanted to first start by asking, like, what are microplastics? How would you define them? And how are they making our way so quickly into our bodies?
Yeah, what you said reminds me of a citation that people say that we are made of stardust, but actually nowadays we are more made of plastics. And it is clear that when you look at it, there's some studies claiming, there's microplastics in brains, there's microplastic in the liver, everywhere. And actually, this is more difficult to find a place where there's no microplastic. And this is really a problem because nowadays in our brain, in every tissue, there's grams of plastic. And these are coming from our lifestyle, from clothing, from our diet. Everything is wrapped in plastic, made of plastic. And so you have these microplastics, which are particles of plastics. They can be shedded from larger plastics, from a bottle of water, for instance. They have different sizes. Some are bigger than others. And some which are very tiny, they even look like hormones and can act like hormones and really interfere with our health on the long term. And these microplastics, which are really of like different types and different size, they mix also with other chemicals which are everywhere in our environment. We talk about medication residues, we talk about heavy metals, flame retardants, and it makes that we are exposed to tens of thousands of chemicals. If I make a blood test right now on you, I'm sure I would find hundreds of chemicals which are circulating in your blood, and everyone is like that. And it's because sometimes it's even chemicals which have been banned since 40 years. And because they bioaccumulate, they really are persistent, they don't degrade, we are just dragging all this pollution which accumulates in our bodies. And this is why then when you are making an autopsy of someone who dies at the age of 80, you look at the brain, you look at the liver, you look at reproductive organs, you will find grams of plastics inside because this is an accumulation of the consequence of our lifestyle.
It's quite scary when we think about it in that way. I mean, maybe we do. Tell me if I'm wrong. I guess we don't actually know the impacts of what it's having in our bodies right now. We just know that it's kind of lodged there.
For many of them, yes, we don't know. The larger ones, we know that they will create inflammation and that actually there's good studies on this because if you look at the microplastics which are accumulated in brain, if you look at the people who have dementia, they have generally higher quantities of microplastic in their brain because it's causing inflammation, and then it will make people more sick and more prone to have some disease. Same in the heart, in the blood vessels. If there's more microplastics, there's more inflammation, you are more at risk of having some cardiovascular issues. So there's a lot we don't know, but there's also a lot we know about these microplastics. And then there's not just the microplastics, but the nanoplastics, the ones which are smaller. And these ones, we really know well what they do because it's clear that they are interfering with our hormones and they can make us sick on the long term. So let's say we know the tip of the iceberg, but we know enough to act if we wanted to really change our exposure.
So they're the endocrine disruptors that you're talking about, which is really related to our hormone system. Well, I don't know if you saw recently the French study that came out. I mean, great, I'm speaking to a Frenchman here, but the French study that came out, did you see that recently that made headlines?
Which one you mean?
There's quite a few. So this is the one that was by the National Food Safety Agency. And they found, so this was what really surprised me. And this is not to scare people, because I have a water filter at home that I've put in under my sink now. But when I'm out, I always take my water bottle with me, my stainless steel water bottle. One, just because it's cheaper, but two, also because I'm not having to buy plastic bottles when I'm out. But the National Food Standard Safety Agency found that drinks in glass bottles actually contain more microplastics than those in plastic or metal. And the reason for this is that they trace the source back to the paint on the caps of these glass bottles. And when the caps rub or get scratched, tiny plastic particles can leach into the drink. So I think, a conscious consumer, and that's most people that listen to this podcast, would probably have their own stainless steel water bottle, or they would say, I'm actively probably going to make a choice of buying a glass bottle if I'm in an airport rather than a plastic one, because for me, it will probably have less microplastics. Now, I know that I'm not saying that that is 100% true. This is one study, and I think we have to be really aware of that. We can't just say, okay, well then 100% glass bottles are worse than plastics. That's a very reductionist view. But it really surprised me that I thought, wow, okay, in this study, it showed that they actually were worse.
Yeah, I was also very surprised by this study, and I looked at what they were testing, and it's clear that it was a large range of bottles. I would not rush to the conclusion that I would completely switch from glass bottle to plastic bottles, because we really know that the impact of plastic bottles are worse. But it clearly indicates at least that manufacturers have to do something to avoid this, and that also more testing have to be done, because I think that it was really an extract of the French market, and it doesn't maybe represent every type of bottles, because a glass bottle can have different types of cap, different types of paint. And so we need to understand more, but it's always the same. It's always thinking that our products are safe, but then there's always something that you realize that it is not safe. And this is really an interesting study. And it's clear that everyone has been saying, myself, you have to take glass bottles because they are safer, and until you realize that maybe they are not as safe. And I guess in this case, it's also the fact of not drinking also too many of like sodas, and because it was also mostly in these type of bottles, because also they are a bit acidic, and so it can really attack the cap and release microplastics. So someone drinking water in glass bottle, I would not tell the person to switch back to plastic because of this study, but this is clearly alarming.
Yeah, and I do want people to not fear this. I think this is a bigger conversation, just to give more context. It's so ubiquitous in our lives now, microplastics. And actually, interestingly, we're talking about water bottles because it's probably the first thing that I think about. But actually, if we look at the context of things, when I was thinking about this, of where are we getting it from, I heard washing machines was a big place that we get microplastics from, which really surprised me. Our tea bags, like the things that we're putting in every day. As you said, the clothes that we're wearing, a lot of gym clothes are made from synthetic fibers, not natural fibers. So it's just these thought mechanisms, I think, that maybe when we stop and really think about it, like how much of this is in our lives, and we can't escape it. This is the thing. I think we'd have to kind of go, okay, what active choices can I make in my life? But one thing that I found really interesting, and I really wanted to share, is the IV drip market at the moment is increasing. A lot of people are getting IVs. And I find this in a way quite funny, because most people that invest in IV drips, it's expensive. So it's a certain type of person that wants to really invest. And I put in quotations, if you're listening to this on audio, you're not seeing me do this, but optimize their lifestyle, right? Optimize their health and tweaking it. Well, I was like, well, I wonder what the interesting research is there, because actually I was thinking about an IV drip is mostly made from plastic. And so it made me want to look at the research very quickly. And I say this because people are going in there because they're actively wanting to make sure that they're doing everything they can for their health to be in the best top 1%. And then I thought, well, wait, they're just putting plastic into their arm. And so an interesting study I saw is that a 250 milliliter saline bag has about 7,500 particles per bag of plastic, and that figure spikes to 25,000 if you're being admitted for dehydration, or 52,500 in surgery using multiple bags. And that study was published in the Environment and Health, and it basically was polypropylene. Am I saying that right? Microplastics. And I thought this is really interesting because the amount of people now that are getting drips for NAD plus or all of these extra boosters that people are getting, well, they're also then just putting more microplastics into their body. And if someone's having 2 liters of water, I think I read, every day, which is the standard, from a plastic bottle, they're getting around 3,300 microplastics a year just from bottles. So when you're putting it in that context, you're getting one drip. You're getting a lot more from one session than just from drinking water bottles every day.
Yeah, it's clear. And these 1% of people who are doing this, they generally are not aware about this environmental health concern and microplastics. But it's clear that the problem is larger because all of this is wide-scale use of plastics in hospital. And it's clear that sometimes when you are in a hospital, you get more intoxicated at the exit than at the entrance because it's the food you eat in a hospital. It's these plastics which are everywhere. And there have been some studies that clearly when you are in a hospital, you are getting intoxicated, like you said, by microplastics, but also by endocrine disruptors. And this really has a lot of effect because when you are, for instance, drinking from a plastic cup, which is made of plastic, or sometimes also like made of cardboard, but people don't realize that there's plastic lining inside, you are drinking a lot of microplastics and also endocrine disruptors. There's bisphenol A inside this. And there are some studies showing that if you do that, 2 hours later, you can see a surge in blood pressure. It has a really strong effect on the body, straight away, immediate. And maybe these are not even the most worrying because the effects which are the most worrying are the long-term effect because this is this cumulative exposure, which at the end of your life, making you sick.
What do you think for general everyday person, the biggest form of ingestion of microplastics is that we can try and reduce quite quickly?
This is in the kitchen that everything happens because I think second place would be the clothing and what we are using, but in the kitchen we are using so much plastic. It's either food wrapped in plastic or plastic bottles, plastic spoons, and when you warm the food, either it's in a pan or either it's in a microwave, you are releasing millions of microplastics. And sometimes we talk about being worried by thousands of microplastics, but actually if you are warming some tea in a plastic cup or some food in the microwave, you will be releasing millions of microplastics. And in this case, this is really where there is the highest risk. And I like to take this example because this is also where you can act easily, because it's so easy to stop warming food in the microwave, to stop using plastic or drinking cups which are made of plastics, that you can really change and you will reduce a lot your exposure to microplastics.
Iron is one of the most common deficiencies that I see in clinic, especially in women. And it's not just about feeling tired. Low iron can impact your energy, your focus, your mood, and even your immune system. It's something we really need to be aware of because if left untreated, iron deficiency can become very serious. Now, UK data shows that around 20 to 35% of women aged 18 to 50 do not meet the recommended dietary guidelines for iron intake. And if you're pregnant, menstruating, or following a vegetarian or vegan diet, your needs are even higher, and therefore you're more at risk. So that's why I often recommend Spartone. Now, this is a naturally sourced iron-rich water that comes from the Welsh Hills. It contains ferrous iron, the most absorbable form, with studies showing up to 40% absorption. So your body can actually use what it takes in. Now, it's also incredibly gentle. It's one natural ingredient, there's no harsh tablets, and there's no digestive issues. I use it myself, and it is my go-to in clinic. You can pick up Spartone at Boots, and if you've been feeling low on energy, it's absolutely worth checking in on your iron with your doctor or GP.
It's having consciousness, isn't it? I think, interestingly, a friend said to me about a year ago, He said, I went into a supermarket and I decided for 2 weeks to not be able to, I wasn't allowed to buy anything that was wrapped in plastic. He gave up after 4 days because he just was like, it was impossible for me to live. He wasn't close to a farmer's market. He wasn't close to somewhere that he could go and easily get this, where it was all laid out fresh. I know that that's why I find when I go to places like France, into the French markets or into Italy, they have a lot more fruit and vegetables open outside. The fruit and veg is much more rich and looks more delicious, but easily it's not all wrapped in plastic. Whereas in London and in certain places in America, especially when I record the show in New York or in LA, I mean, everything is wrapped in plastic. It's actually quite hard. And he literally tried, but after 4 days, he was like, it was impossible. I actually couldn't buy anything.
Yeah, it is impossible to avoid because nowadays our society is really using plastic for everything. And sometimes even if you don't see it and you avoid it because you see it, you still have microplastics inside. So it's just everywhere, and not just in the food, it's in the water, the air you breathe, and it's really impossible to avoid. And you can do the best you can, of course, to reduce the exposure. And there's probably a lot of what you can do and exposing you can be avoided, but avoiding completely plastics is impossible. That's where we should not try to be the best version of ourselves, because otherwise you stop having the social life, you are being stressed. And even if we are living in a world of chemicals, plastics, and everything is polluted, sometimes we have also to accept it, and somehow we can act on it, but we should not completely being stressed about it.
For somebody listening to this and just hearing maybe the sheer form that they're having it in their lives, maybe unconsciously, how can we make people not scared? How can we make people not be fearful around this? Because that's something I'm also very aware of.
I think by explaining, this is really the first step, because something which is scary is that we are exposed to so many chemicals, but we don't know. When you know what you are exposed to, you can make a choice. If you want to smoke, you know that cigarette is toxic, but at least you choose that. And if you want to buy something in plastic, at least if you knew what it would do, what is in the plastic and the risk, it would be much better. Nowadays, you find some plastics where it's written that it's bisphenol A free. So it's free of that, but then you don't know what's inside. So if we had transparency, everything was clear, I think it would be much better to educate people and then to reduce the fear, because this is invisible, impacting us. I think this would be really the first step to raise awareness and have more transparency.
Yeah, so you just spoke about there something that was really interesting that you see written on a lot of these kind of plastic products, which is like BPA-Free. Can you first of all explain like what that is, and is that a good alternative? Because there's a lot of safe alternatives registered here, and are they really as safe as we think they are?
I will explain first what is BPA, because this is also an interesting story. Bisphenol A, BPA, this is a molecule which is used in plastics as a plasticizer. This is very small. This is making plastics quite hard and stable. And this is in plastics since decades. And we know since decades that this is an endocrine disruptor. It will interfere with our hormones. It can make us infertile. It can have effects really on the long run on the development of disease. And this is not something new. If you look back in time, in the 1930s, BPA was not invented as a plasticizer. It was developed to be a contraceptive pill at the beginning. And this was completely forgotten. And nowadays we rediscover that it has effects on human population, while it was developed actually to have this effect. It was developed to have this impact. Then it was not used as a contraceptive pill because there was some other more efficient molecules which were used. But it was clear from the beginning that it was estrogenic, so it was mimicking estrogen hormones. And decades later, industries still choose to make it into plastics, into our everyday life, knowing that it has this effect. And still nowadays, some regulatory agencies are debating is it an endocrine disruptor or not? Sometimes we are really in a crazy world because it was invented for that. And so we know clearly that bisphenol A is a molecule that everyone has in their body. Like, I don't think you can find a person who don't have BPA in their body. That's why BPA has been phased out. And nowadays in plastic, you have alternatives of bisphenol A because people are starting to get aware that bisphenol A is toxic. And as a replacement, industries have been choosing not something very complex. They just replace BPA by BP, C, D. They have the whole alphabet like that. And this is not written on the package. If you have a plastic, a baby bottle, which is BPA-free, you don't know if there is BPF, S, or another one. And that is something that was really worrying me at some point. And that's why I made one study that I can also explain a bit more to understand the effects of these alternatives. Because at the time when I was working at King's College, I still do, but more lighter position, I wanted to understand the effects of these alternatives because I saw that many times with other products. There is a pesticide which is toxic. We identify that, we replace it by something which is almost identical. So I wondered if it was the same for bisphenols. And for that, I met a scientist working at the US Environmental Protection Agency who was also interested by this topic. And we teamed up to make a study where we tested a range of alternatives which are used in plastics nowadays. And we tested this in breast cancer cells. This is a model we have in a lab. We have these cells in a box, and they can be used to understand if something will interfere with hormone signals. We did that, and we clearly showed that alternatives, not all of them, but many of them were more disturbing the hormones than BPA itself. This is a study which was then, it had consequences. It was a good study. It was published in one of the top toxicology journal. It made the front page of the journal, the front page of the website of the EPA. There was not even a senator in the US who asked for a bill to be passed to ban these compounds from baby bottles in some states. But after that, we never heard of it because there was industry lobby which cut completely these efforts. And that's why nowadays we are still in the same situation where we have bisphenol A alternatives everywhere. And it's just a marketing to say that something is BPA-free because you don't know what is inside the bottle. And it's likely that this is something more toxic. So people should be aware of this. And so when you have a baby bottle which is BPA-free, if it's in plastic, this is not safe. It's better to have a glass bottle. And I take the example of a baby bottle because this is something which is very important because babies are exposed a lot to these plastics.
Wow, that's so it's still got the bisphenol in it, but it's just a B, C, D alternative, basically. That's what you're saying. But they can still label it as BPA free because that just means that it's the A alternative free, but not the other ones.
Yeah, this is always the treadmills. It change when BPA is identified and in the public scandal about its toxicity, they can replace it easily by the B, the C, the D, and they can do the whole alphabet like that. And no one will raise their eyebrows because this is not something we talk about in the press. And this is also good for marketing. Then you can make a new label, sell the bottles even more expensive because they are BPA free.
And is there research to show like how this affects a baby's like brain development or any type of development, really, if they're having like very high levels of this within the bottles?
Yes, the bisphenols, so not just the A, but also all the collection of bisphenols, they interfere with hormones, especially estrogen hormones. And these hormones have an importance for everything in our body. It's not just fertility, it's also the brain development. And so when sensitive individuals are exposed to that, and by that I mean, for instance, pregnant women, like little small quantities of BPA can disturb the development of the brain of a baby. And these endocrine disruptors, there's clear studies, many of them, showing that if you are exposed to this during pregnancy, you have more chance to have a baby which has cognitive deficits or lower IQ. This is clear. It sounds scary like that, like if I was talking about something like speculative, like chemtrail or really absurd concerns. But actually, this is really identified by many scientific studies that these compounds, they alter the brain development, leading to cognitive deficits. They alter reproductive development, leading to infertility. And this is really identified since decades now.
This is making a very broad spectrum quote because you kind of spoke about the cognitive declines. Do you think things like autism and things like that can also be affected by these?
Yes, and I would not say that it's just strictly this, but it is a contributor. There's clearly more cases of autism, and every year, at least for instance in the US, they are quite precise about that. The numbers are also always increasing. Before it was 1 in 60, now it's 1 out of 50 boys born who have autism. It's affecting more the boys in this case. And this is clearly due to endocrine disruptors.
I've watched the science of adaptogens grow personally over the last few years, and I've become more curious in their role in nervous system support, focus, and resilience, because adaptogens basically buffer the cortisol that gives us that stress and anxiety. But here's the thing, quality is everything. Most adaptogens on the market don't actually contain enough of the active compounds that you see in clinical studies to make a difference. That's why I've partnered with London Nootropics. These guys only use clinical studied standardized extracts. This is really, really important to get the benefits that you're seeing in clinical research.
And they work with Hephaestus, Europe's leading mushroom bioscience company.
They have high bioavailability. They use incredible ingredients like KSM-66, ashwagandha, and rhodola life. And these are the active ingredients that you need to see the difference. They have lots of different blends. Flow gets me into deep focus with lion's mane. Zen helps support my calm and steady my clarity with ashwagandha. And Mojo gives a clean lift, no crash. And Mush Love made with fantastic fungi with 3 Hephaestus mushrooms to elevate your day. Enjoy 20% off and use code LiveWellBeWell. They come in these fantastic little sachets and they're great for traveling too.
Wow, I think you mean there's so much in there because also I think about, babies now being born and there's more awareness of neurodiversity, whether there's more awareness of it and that's why we feel like there's more, or whether there is just an increase in it is like also really hard to understand. But also alongside that, we're also seeing with fertility, which you've mentioned, especially male fertility. I think for so long, women were always not, I don't want to say blamed because I don't think it was ever a blame, but it was always more of the women that we looked at when we have fertility problems, right? And now we're also being way more aware that men are experiencing fertility problems. And since the 1970s, there's been a 50% drop in sperm counts. And so I think now there's a much more conversation, and I do want to do a specific fertility episode on this because I think it's such an important one for men especially. But it's interesting because now I'm listening to you speak, there must also be a connection as well between, what men are ingesting and women are ingesting and affecting fertility rates.
Yeah, this is well known, and it's clear that there is a fertility crisis in human populations, and this is something which is silent because like probably you, knowing many people who have problems to have babies, and they don't think necessarily about having their environment quality checked, whether they're exposed to chemicals. And this is really now identified as a big contributor. If you look first 100 years ago, it was already identified that some populations of birds are disappearing completely because they are exposed to some toxic endocrine disruptors. And there were studies already in the 1930s on that. And alligators, so many animals were identified to have fertility problems because of pollution. And it was only in the 1990s that it was really discovered that it is also the case in human, because we have been observing, like you said, since 1970s that the sperm quality and concentration has dropped. Before, we were at around 100 million sperm by milliliter. Now we are at 50 million per milliliter. If you go below that and reach 15 million per milliliter, this is when you become infertile. And so we are really not in a good trajectory. And the link to pollution was identified clearly in the 1990s, where some scientists pointed that some of these endocrine disruptors, they will alter either estrogen or testosterone hormones during development of the baby. And so the babies which are born have the development is slower, they have less testosterone, the sperm quality is lower, and in the end, they become infertile as an adult. And this is now very clear. And this is the problem identified in males, but also for females, this is also a problem. Nowadays, we also know that these products also microplastics or bisphenols or all these endocrine disruptors, they also interfere with women's fertility, and couples who are exposed to these. It's clear from epidemiological studies. Like you measure that in blood or urine, and you see that for the people who have the highest level, they have difficulties to have kids, they have miscarriage, and this is really making them infertile.
I think it's such an important point because I think fertility carries a lot of shame with it. I think miscarriage, especially from when we had conversations on this show and from friends that have suffered, carries such a heavy weight. I think men also, it carries a massive heavy weight of shame to think that, their morphology or their sperm count is lower than it should be and it's their fault. And then they've had to watch their partner go through IVF and they feel very guilty. And it's very hard for them to have a conversation about that because they're struggling with the shame that they're carrying. And then this is a very sweeping statement. And I'm sure there are some fertility clinics that do this, but I don't think that many fertility clinics focus on the actual other important conversations that we should be having, such as the nutrition that we're consuming, such as the microplastics, such as the environment, such as the chemicals that we're around. If people were more aware of these other things that they could do, it's really important. And for instance, egg freezing, it's another really important thing that is increasing because women are maybe not finding the right partners, are having children later than ever before, are not sure whether they want to have children because people are working, they're carrying on their careers. And I also found it really interesting that women that had higher levels of microplastics had fewer eggs retrieved in their egg retrieval. And there was also microplastics in the follicle fluid. And these things I don't think are spoken about. And so if you are having a lighter egg retrieval than someone else, we're not knowing if that's because of the microplastics in the blood. That conversation's never been discussed. And so there's such a bigger conversation here that we could be having to support fertility for men and women. So for anyone listening to this that's maybe going through an egg retrieval, that's maybe going through IVF, that's maybe just found out as a man that they've got a lower sperm count or their morphology is not as great as they wished it was, for either gender, like navigating this, what advice would you give them in terms of microplastics and how to try and reduce them to maybe to conceive or have a healthier baby that won't have these problems that you've just discussed?
It's clear that there is a job to be created here, or better organized at least, is that these couples, or at least maybe even everyone who wants to have a kid, to have pre-conception consultations so that couples are guided what they should do for their nutrition, what they should do for exposure to chemicals, their lifestyle in general, and this doesn't exist. And this would avoid a lot of issues in babies if we had these pre-conception consultations. Because we don't have that, unfortunately, we have to self-educate.
We have live well, be well. We have live well, be well, Robin.
And so we can educate with this media. And for that, there's so many things we can do, but there's a few things which are more important, is that to be careful with plastics in the kitchen, to avoid warming in plastic, to avoid using ultra-processed food, to cook by yourself with fresh ingredients, which also guarantees that it's better quality. That is one thing which is important. Ventilating the house. It's very important because you have also a lot of endocrine disruptors which are floating in the air because of the material of the couch or the paints. And if you are ventilating the house frequently, at least every day, this is something which can be helpful. Cleaning also, because they accumulate in the dust. And if you have dust everywhere and touch the dust, you will be also more exposed to that. And there are some also more specific things like not eating too much fish, which is high in heavy metals, like salmon, tuna. These are fish which are contaminated a lot by heavy metals, and that can also influence health.
Gosh, it's so hard, isn't it? Because I speak about fish so much because I am, my team would be laughing at me listening to this and watching it, because I'm a massive advocate of omega-3 fatty acids, EPA and DHA, the longer chains that you can only get in fatty fish. So then we come into this conundrum of like, well, I hear people talk about the importance of fatty fish, especially in pregnancy, because that's so important for the third trimester of brain development for the child, and our needs go up because it's for the mummy and the baby. And then we hear, oh, but it's also going to be an endocrine disruptor, so it's just going to have microplastics. So how does one navigate that?
If you eat smaller fish, this is also
Sardines.
better. Yes. And if you want to have your omega-3s, nowadays there's some good supplementation with algae oil, which is not high in these contaminants, which can be used. And this is much more handy than to really consume a lot of fish, because it's also very difficult to reach these omega-3 levels, which are having an effect. You have to eat a lot of fish for that. And so this is one aspect for which supplementation can be important.
Yeah. I will caveat that though, is that we still aren't sure about the absorption of all the different supplements. It's such a hard one to navigate. And I put that in as a nutritionist because, you know, we can say you can supplement, but actually, do we know the absorption rate? We're really not entirely sure. It depends on the manufacturer. You know, half of them only have a 25% of that tablet actually made of DHA and EA, and the other is bulking agent. So it's such a confusing,
it's difficult.
Such a confusing area for people.
They're oxidized as well. When you go into the details like that, people get scared because they feel that there's nothing they can do for their life to avoid these chemicals. And that's why I think we should really stay high level of like trying to diminish exposure with like simple things, not just looking at everything in the kitchen, but removing the plastics, to ventilate, to have a cleaner house, and to avoid synthetic chemicals and synthetic products in clothing. Cosmetics also is something that women don't need to overuse all the time. I'm not saying that women should not use cosmetics, because this is also something which makes comfortable and happy, and emotional health is very important. But during pregnancy, this is really a period where you should minimize as much as possible and use the natural ones, because this is full of toxic chemicals. Cleaning products as well, wearing gloves. When you are cleaning, you open the windows. So these little things can make in the end a big impact without being completely stressed about lifestyle.
Yeah, I think like the thing that I realized, that I actually changed all of my household products to more eco products. And a lot of these eco products you can also get on subscription base. You haven't got to think about trying to go to the supermarket to get it, which is great for me, where I struggle to get to the supermarket. But also I think it's just having the awareness and this conversation. The ventilation in the house, I remember my mum texted me and saying, I feel like I do all these things. I feel very happy about my, you know, microplastic use. And those are the things I think that it is important. But I do think that trying to give people the alternative, I'm going to get back to the omega-3, because there are things you can do. I was just thinking sardines on toast, kippers on toast, anchovies. I've started putting anchovies in my omelets and stuff. These are all great ways to get in that omega-3 without having to just take a supplement. I was just thinking in my brain, what is it that we could give people as actual advice? And there are still ways that you can get in fish that are the smaller fish that have less of the heavy metals than the tunas and the salmons.
Yeah, that's good advice. And this is also good because it's practical. Then you get some ideas of recipes you can implement. And that's all about creating a routine. Because then if you have to force yourself, think about it, this is something which becomes difficult. But like everything about lifestyle, if you want a change to work, it has to work as a routine. So this is really something where you do it every week, you try to do it at the same time, the same day. And this is then step by step, all these little change which seem difficult at the beginning, in the end, after that, after some point, you forget about it and just you do it automatically.
And one thing I wanted to ask, and I heard about this coming here because I was trying to listen to lots of different information around microplastics just to kind of see where the current state of affairs are. And one person was talking about saunas being a really good way to also help detox. I'm very aware of using the word detox, but to help eliminate microplastics out of our bodies via sweat. Is that scientifically proven? Like, is it good? I mean, I know there's an amazing health benefit of having saunas for cardiovascular systems, but does that translate into microplastics? Can we kind of simply sweat it out or not?
Not really. There was a study showing that in sweat you can find some plastics like phthalate, and then you think that you are getting less intoxicated by that. But there was just one study, and this is small quantities. It's not the main reason for doing some sauna. Sauna is great. It's clearly having a lot of benefits. But if you want to detox, which is also a word that I don't like so much, if you want to detox from toxic chemicals, sauna is really not the best way for that.
Okay, I'm really glad you said that, because there's so much conversation in a world that I'm not very connected to, which is the biohacking world. Yes, there's some like truths there for sure, but I think sometimes we can get too obsessed with certain things that we think have a huge outcome and actually they don't. But I do love a sauna, and I do have to say it has incredible benefits for other things, such as like our cardiovascular system, right? So let's go to food, my favorite. And I know that you've done a lot of work in food. Now, there is a huge conversation around organic versus non-organic. You've mentioned pesticides in our 5 questions for Substat, The Compassionate Cure. That's where your work basically started. So when we're kind of thinking about reducing our toxic load that we're ingesting, food is confusing. Organic versus non-organic, all of these things, people are like, is it worth paying the extra 50 cents or 50 pounds or whatever it is? 50 pounds? Gosh, sorry, 50p. If you're paying an extra 50 pounds, then that's quite expensive. But, you know, when we're really bringing it down, is it worth the extra margin to buy organic? And if it is, on what types of products and what types of food should we be really veering towards when we're looking at organic?
Yeah, it's a very complex question, because nowadays organic food has become a market, and so it's industrialized, and you find some things which are sometimes a bit contradictory with in the first principles of organic food. And buying organic is sometimes useful. Like if you want to protect someone, like a pregnant woman, and be on the safe side, buying organic fruits and vegetables is a good thing. If you want to buy organic and you buy cereal bars and this type of things, this is wasting your money in this case.
Because it's ultra processed.
Yeah, so there's a lot of ultra processed food which is organic. There was a survey in a French supermarket done a couple of years ago, and 25% of the organic food is actually ultra processed. And it's really a big market. This is not something that was the case 20 years ago when organic food was really first becoming a bit trendy. It was on the farmer's market. You were buying your fresh fruits and vegetables. They were not wrapped in plastic. And in this case, this organic food is much healthier. It's more rich in polyphenols, more rich in vitamins, because the fruits and vegetables take their time to mature. They have less pesticides and synthetic fertilizer. So this is really much healthier. But nowadays, organic food is industrialized, and you find something which are completely contradictory. You find some fruits which are organic and they have to be wrapped in plastics in supermarkets. And in this case, what is the point of buying this type of organic food? That's where it's really difficult to go into the details about one by one. But I would say that really fruits and vegetables, if you want to take care of your health, it's much better to buy them organic. And in this case, to avoid to buy them in a supermarket if you can. And if you can buy it in the market, if you can buy it in some other type of grocery stores where it's more naturally preserved, not wrapped in plastic, this is much better.
And I also think there is an important conversation, because I spend a lot of time in the US at the moment, especially with the show. And I used to live in New York for a very long time, 10 years ago, when the health industry was less of a marketable industry back then than it is now. I also think there's really different laws between the American and the EU, and now in England, because sadly, or the UK, because we're sadly not part of the EU. But again, like I trust it a bit more here on not having organic, but I will always buy organic when I'm in America, just because of the regulations are so different.
Yeah, the regulations in the US are really awful for the use of pesticides. There are things which are banned since a long time in the EU because we know that it's very toxic. And there it is used wide scale without any precaution. And so there are countries maybe that deserve to have more focus on organic foods than others, for sure.
But I guess if you're going into supermarkets and you're buying an organic food wrapped in plastic, it's probably not going to be that beneficial to spend the extra money. Is that kind of the conclusion that we're coming to? But if you're buying a banana that's just on the shelf, that's organic, then it's probably worth the investment of the extra money to buy that banana.
Yes, and you can go into a level of details on what to buy or not, because not every fruit and vegetables are contaminated the same by pesticides and toxics. And when you are buying strawberries, apples, like fruits which are a bit soft and can be attacked by insects in the field, these ones are sprayed more with pesticides. And that is better in this case to buy the organic versions. For leafy vegetable like spinach, lettuce, all of that stuff is also sprayed a lot because they are fragile in the field. And if you buy, for instance, a broccoli or some things which is growing below the ground, generally they are on the safer side. And in this case, you can make more educated choice. And if you have a bit more money to spend for choosing organic, you can buy what has the most impact.
Wow. So how bad are pesticides for us? Because I think we hear a lot about it, but I don't think we speak about it as much in terms of research, or we haven't done on this show for at least a very long time. So how worried should we be about the pesticides that are sprayed all over our crops?
Well, pesticides are meant to kill. They are meant to kill plants if they are herbicides, insects if they are insecticides. And so manufacturers of pesticides, they try to make it as safe as possible. There's no intention of being harmful, but often this is not the case. And you discover after a few decades that these pesticides also alter endocrine signals. Many of them, they are endocrine disruptors. They will cause some cancer. They will cause some neurodegenerative disease. And often in the more sensitive individuals, like kids or elderly people. And it's much better to avoid pesticides. But in this case, I want to add that it's not just about fruits and vegetables. We are using a lot of pesticides in our homes, and we don't realize that because many people will use some insecticides to get rid of a wasp or to get rid of mosquitoes. And in this case, I see you feel concerned.
Okay. So the reason why I'm going to ask this question is I put a picture on my social media a couple of weeks ago when I was on holiday in France, because I have this blood that mosquitoes love. I landed from the airport, and from the airport to where I was staying, which was an hour away in a car, I got bitten 8 times. And so, my arm had actually inflamed so bad that I couldn't wear my watch. And it was just so itchy. And I obviously have a bit of an allergic reaction. Anyway, so I'm spraying myself constantly in mosquito spray.
There are natural products which are better than others.
I know that. I don't think they work.
The most toxics are really the one we spray in our house.
Okay, so really mosquito spray is fine.
Yeah.
Fine.
Well, fine. To be avoided if you can. And probably the most dangerous, I would say, is what we put on the skin of our dogs or cats or on the collars for lice or ticks to avoid them to be bitten, because in this case, this is really loaded with insecticides which are toxic. We often talk about insecticides which are in fields and protecting the pollinators because they are very sensitive. But in these collars, you have the doses of insecticides which can kill entire hives of bees, and no one really know about it and talk about it. And we are just cuddling our pets, and if we are putting them these collars, we are affecting their health and our health as well. And so this is really something to be avoided if you can. Sometimes it's just so easy for people who live in a city. They don't really have to worry about some of these parasites because their dogs don't go so much outside. it's better to avoid. And I know some people, they do it automatically because their vet told them to do that, to use this collar, and they don't need to. And I told them, look, avoid that, and there's no problem. It doesn't have an impact.
Wow. We don't really think about the impact that our pets have, do we? Very, I guess it's such a bigger, wider, loaded question, isn't it? So thinking about this on a whole, and I want to make sure that we kind of wrap this up in a really hopeful way with a big bow on the top, which I know is maybe not how people have felt during this. Like, I don't want us to turn into plastic zombies. What is your kind of thoughts on like the next 5 years of plastic usage and things that whether we can do it as a country, as a policy, as an individual, why should we have a lot of hope that we're not going to turn into plastic zombies, basically?
Yeah, it's true that when we have this conversation, sometimes it's scary and it passes a lot of message of fear, but there's a lot we can do for ourselves first. And also in the future, it's clear that I feel we have passed the worst period of intoxication because nowadays we see more and more green plastics, which are made of plant compounds. We see a more and more awareness. So we are at the beginning, but I feel that the next 5-10 years will be much better and we will see a decrease in the exposure to these compounds.
Amazing. So I guess for people to be like really proactive stepping forward, it's literally look into the kitchen. I was just thinking there of even like plastic chopping boards or plastic knives or anything like that. Try and replace it with wooden and like proper good knives. That's also just important so you can cut your vegetables properly. Thinking about the Teflon things that people cook in, that obviously were great because it would, they weren't great, but they would promote themselves as non-stick. So really looking at saucepans, looking at babies' bottles, what you're storing your food in, how you're heating your food up, all of these like small changes, even making sure you're getting a good shopping bag, to not even put your fruits and vegetables into a plastic shopping bag, trying to carry a stainless steel water bottle with you. All of these things can make massive changes.
It can make a massive change. And it's also empowering when you do that for yourself because you really get in control about your lifestyle. You change for wooden chopping board. You are also changing some other things in your kitchen. And you really take control of your lifestyle. You can raise awareness to others. And this is really empowering because then you feel that you know what you are doing, and then you can take also extra steps of like cooking healthier, making some plans for your better nutrition, physical activity, sleep, and all that other aspects of lifestyle which can be modulated. I feel that when people get some little advice that they can get into their routine, it's really empowering. And then you can really become proud of yourself. It's also a challenge to start cooking on a pan which is not made of Teflon. It's not easy. But then it's really a process and you get used to that. And this is really where like it's first changing a habit, then it's build a routine, and then you change completely your lifestyle. And for the next decades, you are more likely to end up your life with being healthy and also very happy because this is also fulfilling.
And I guess that takes us back to a really big question in the 5 questions, which was, being more mindful and actually knowing that you can rely on yourself. And I think sometimes with this load of information that people might have just got from this episode, it's not about having to do it all in one go. I always say with trying to increase your fruit and vegetable consumption is every time you go to the shop to do a big shop, add in 1 or 2 pieces of whole foods that you've never used or never cooked with. Just do that, and by the end of the month, you've increased it by the 4 or 8 without really putting too much stress on. And so I'd say with this, take one thing today to reduce and then write them all down and then add another one in 3 weeks because you've already started to become more accustomed to it rather than saying, I'm going to do these 10 things in one go, because then for that brain, it's too much of a mental load to kind of carry. So just doing one thing at a time, similar to how I try and look at this now, how I approach tasks. If I try and do 10 at once, I'm going to fail. But if I just keep slowly ticking one off, I slowly get to the end of that list.
Yeah, you can put a note on your fridge about something new to change your lifestyle in the next weeks, and you do that, and at some point it becomes a habit. And we all should always try to accept also that sometimes it's difficult to be the best version of ourselves. We should not strive for that because we have a social life and not everything can be controlled. So we should also accept for our well-being these little imperfections, but try constantly to improve the small things which are controllable. I know my wife always tell me when I come home and she hears something I say, but we don't do that at home, we should change. But this is also part of trying to have a normal life. We have so many things in our lives which are difficult to control. Sometimes healthy food or healthy lifestyle makes the top of the list, but then you will have some problems, whether it's health or personal or social. And being healthy is not anymore the priority. And in this case, that's why we should really just have a thin layer of improvements which build on, because you can't just always have this as a main target. We have to have this in our whole life.
Beautifully said. And so that leads me to my last question, Robin, which is, what does Live Well, Be Well mean to you?
I really like the show because it's a balance between not just health, but also other aspects of mental well-being or social aspects. I was looking at, there was one episode on loneliness, for instance. This is nice because then it's just not just about like technologies, tools that you can use, but it's about the life in general, like people live it in real life, not just about artificial tools that work on 1% of people.
Thank you. Well, I love that that's what Live Well, Be Well means to you. I think it is. It's very multifaceted, and I think that's the beauty of today's conversation, right? There's the evidence and it might change, but right now this is where we lie, and to become more conscious in the decisions that we can do for ourselves, that we can tweak and pull. And as you said, those pieces of the pie are going to change depending on each individual circumstance. So Robin, it's been an amazing conversation. I'm so pleased that you've come onto this show and speaking about something that is on not just trend, but a concern and a fear for so many people. And I hope we've managed to balance some of those concerns in today's episode. And I'd love for you to come back on and do another one because I know you also very much look at fasting as well. And I'd love to kind of explore a little bit more deeper with you, even whether that can balance the effects of microplastics.
Yes, it will be a pleasure.
So thank you so much for coming on to Live Well, Be Well.